This session is brought to you with the help of Sundial Cannabis, the natural alternative for modern wellness. Hello and welcome to Sessions by the Herb Life. My name is Tiana, your friendly sessions facilitator, and we are back for season 2 with a new lineup of women, mostly with a sprinkling of man here and there, who have made cannabis their business. Sessions is a podcast that aims to bring forth the conversations that are happening on the ground of the cannabis industry, to generate new ideas and highlight the dedication of some of the plant's greatest advocates. By bringing together a rotating roster of people with an emphasis on women and diversity, we hope to share with you the passions, the challenges, and the triumphs of those working in the cannabis space. Much like you, my job really is to sit back and enjoy the ride. And enjoy I did, particularly this episode, as the two guests you're about to hear from happen to own my local and favourite dispensary in Vancouver, the Village Bloomery. Our guests, Andrea and Jeremy, opened the Village back in 2015, where they operated as a grey market store. They closed up shop for a few weeks back in July and August of this year and were reborn as a legal, licensed cannabis retailer in late August. This episode, they talk about their transition into the legal framework and, more importantly, how this has affected consumers, both new and old. Legal cannabis is, of course, still in its infancy, with plenty of kinks that have yet to be ironed out. So there's a lot of illuminating information for any of you interested in understanding the new system and the challenges cannabis retailers face. In the golden age of cannabis retail, as Jeremy puts it, the Village was a really great example of how a dispensary can service the community it operates within. Everything from the design of the store, to the flower products they offered, to the curation of other products, to the staff, was carefully developed to ensure customers felt like they were in good hands. I know I always did. Just listening to them talk about the relationships they developed with growers across the years, the effort they put into having only top quality products, leaves a little to be desired from the new legal framework for sure. But of course, if anyone can do it, the Village can, as they hold themselves to a very high standard. And thankfully, they've been able to retain their quality service in many respects, despite the additional challenges. It should be said that while it is true that in BC, where cannabis was far ahead of many other locations in the country, legalisation has indeed stifled access to cannabis, among other issues. Yet we can still view these changes as a step in the right direction on a grander scale, one which measures universal access to cannabis for Canadians across the country. All in all, a very fascinating episode with Jeremy and Andrea of the Village Bloomery, and without further ado, I'll pass it over to them.
Well, hi, Herb Life audience. This is Andrea and Jeremy from Village Bloomery.
Hello, hello.
Or Jeremy and Andrea, depends on how you look at it. So we're happy to be on the Herb Life podcast today, and we're just going to have a chat about how retail is shaping up in BC.
Mm-hmm. And what it's been like, I guess, the journey across on some level, or using it as a comparison, pre-regulation to regulation.
Speaking of which, What about the regulations? Do you feel like overall the way that this industry has been regulated is adequate, overkill, good for the industry, bad for the industry? Andrea, what do you think?
I think it depends where you are. For me, as someone who's a Vancouverite and who is witness to what goes on in BC, I can see that it's quite a shocking change for many people. Granted, if you go across the country, you can walk into a cannabis retail store anywhere and legally purchase cannabis. So that to me is a really powerful and positive change. But I do empathize, and I do see where regulations need to be reevaluated. Yeah,
from my experience, I guess I always go back to September 2016 when I had the privilege of sitting with the Federal Task Force on Legalization. Anne McClellan commented that BC is about 20 years ahead of the rest of the country in our understanding of the plant, our adoption and our use of the plant, the way it's been normalized in our society. So in my ongoing conversations, I would always bring that up. So speaking with Health Canada or federal policymakers, I was asking them over and over again, hey, BC is a unique situation. We need a carve-out. We need an exception for BC. And they said, no, we're making rules for a nation. We can't have provincial carve-outs. So it'll never get through, and getting national legalization is more important. So we get why these rules, these regulations feel like we've been beaten back into the dark ages of cannabis, because we've lived in a more progressive, enlightened climate around cannabis for a couple decades here.
Yeah.
So for most consumers in BC, walking into a cannabis shop and realizing that you can't get your topical ointments for your grandmother or your mother, and you can't get the CBD or THC vaporizer that you used to get because it was so discreet and worked so well. Like, these are things that now consumers in BC have to wait for, and it's literally driving people away from the regulated market. So the regulations don't make our role easier as retailers in BC.
Yeah.
But like you said, in most of the country, they're just happy to have storefront retail.
It's also a bit of a shock for people who have identified cannabis as a medicinal plant and who have been comfortable walking into dispensaries across Vancouver, all across BC, and possibly the rest of the country, where you had access to concentrated products that may have come in handy for a myriad of
pain or seizure disorders or whatever.
Yeah, and so that conversation kind of got cut short for a lot of those people, and they are left wondering, where do I turn? Who do I speak to? And
they're left with inadequate access from the licensed producers. Licensed producers can't give them the full range of products they enjoyed in the unregulated market. And this segues nicely into what are the retail challenges in this new landscape. It has everything to do with the loss of product diversity.
Well, I want to focus on one thing, though, that I think overall is really, really positive. And as much as we work to create a space that was very friendly to new consumers, I can see that we had become incredibly knowledgeable and we had incredibly sophisticated products in our shop. And that was overwhelming in hindsight. That could have been overwhelming to people who were very brand new. And so many people did not make their way into the back of our shop. Our shop is set up so that the front is oils and capsules and the back is flowers. People were kind of intimidated to go into the back because they knew that's where the really fancy stuff took place, right? Now that it's all pre-packaged and boxed and sort of sealed up and tidy in a way, it's less intimidating for people who know nothing about, and they start to consider brands and how brands present themselves. And it's a little more like other products that they may see in the cosmetic realm or in the food and beverage realm.
Okay,
so there's something positive in that space.
Okay, exactly my point.
I think it needs work.
Like what you're doing is shining a light on some of the positives.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do is focus on the challenges right now. It's about what are the challenges you're finding.
Okay, well, within that, being more accessible, being the positive, the challenge immediately comes forward is that much of this product has been purchased sight unseen, so we don't have a really clear descriptor for what to expect. We went out of our way to make that not a reality, although each batch is different and we don't get to see each batch. So there's a sight unseen issue that's a challenge. There's also a packaging challenge. Everyone knows this. Whereas somebody might come in and say, oh, I'm interested in this brand. And then you show them the box and they'll say, oh my God, no, I don't want that. It's a little shocking for people to see that there's this many layers between them and a little tiny piece of plant matter. So that's challenging for me.
Let's hone in on that a little bit, because this is 2012. Sorry.
It's 2012 and it's time we get on top of this.
Yeah, let's get up to date here. No, it's 2019 and we have islands of plastic floating in our oceans. We have bans on single-use bags and straws in some municipalities in our country, and yet we have these onerous, product-heavy packaging laws that govern cannabis. When you go into a cannabis shop and you want to buy a half ounce of cannabis, instead of walking away with a baggie or a jar, you walk away with 3 to 4 boxes, with containers inside that are sometimes double walled, that are bulkier than they need to be for the amount of cannabis inside due to the labeling requirements. So we've seen regulation create an environmental predator out of the cannabis industry where before it wasn't one.
Well, that's something I don't fully understand, because as I understand it, Health Canada says we have not mandated the type of packaging that must be used. We have set these parameters in place, and the producers have chosen these packages. So it's like, okay, on the one hand, yes, but then the parameters that they've set in place mandate that it must be child safe, that it must be airtight, that there's a number
virgin plastic as well. Plastic. And then, safety warnings, product information, THC stop sign, the brand logo itself. So the guys have to try to figure out how to allocate that real estate in a package that will get their product noticed on the shelf.
Sure.
And, their thinking is more is more. Yeah.
Easy to stack, easy to carry, etc. And that's the truth. They're not being successful. We are having a really challenging time determining what is the phenotype or what is the strain cultivar name. What's the percentages? The language they're speaking is slightly different. It's just, you have to have reading glasses, even if you don't need reading glasses to see the tiny, tiny font.
Yeah.
So that becomes challenging.
Let me chime in here, because one of the key things now around, you triggered my memory. Mm-hmm. Pre-regulation, we had clearly defined products. I'm talking about oils now, and easily differentiated bottles. Yeah. So if you wanted to take a CBD tincture to go to sleep, you wouldn't accidentally take your THC and end up staying awake, really activated.
No.
The ratios that we used to rely on, 1-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, the formulators in the pre-regulation world would ensure that they had the right proportion of their THC extracts and CBD extracts to give you those ratios consistently. Mm-hmm. And we haven't seen the regulated producers take those cues from the unregulated market and create those distinct ratios, because people find their place within those ratios, and we're not able to supply them with those products they've come to depend on.
Again, this goes back to us being so far ahead in the future, right? So maybe that is not a language that existed throughout the country. And I was talking about how it's interesting that when a country is colonized, the first thing you do is change the language so that they don't have their internal dialogue, that they can't have their power centers. And I get it. In a way, you have to kind of create this new universal tongue that everyone's going to understand. That said, taking cues from proven markets would have been wise. And yeah, that is true. The other thing that I was going to think about here, though, you just forgotten.
We were talking about the percentages, the ratios, the package differentiation.
There is a challenge with, differentiating product from product. And some people are doing it well, actually.
Like on flower packages. This is, again, talking about a challenge in packaging. On flower packages, there'll often be identical packaging. And then the sole identifier of what's different about what's inside the package is in the smallest font. Yeah. Hardest to find. Instead of right beside the brand logo strain name, they've got it buried in the technical data about what's in the package. And that brings us to another challenge, is when people look at a flower and they want to know what's the potency of this flower, percent by weight in THC and CBD, those are the things that make the most sense to consumers. But when you look at the regulated packages, it gets very confusing. They have a flower that's supposed to be, 20% THC, and then the first line says 0.79% THC. And you're going, what? And then the next line says total THC, 20.5%. So if you want to be a cannabis geek, well, if you are a cannabis geek and you're scrutinizing this and trying to figure out what's going on, you'll realize that the 0.79% is THC delta 9. Some activated THC exists in all dried flowers. And then the total THC is the THC delta 9 plus the THC acid. And it should be the THC acid less than 12% when the acid group leaves, and that would be your total THC. But they don't adequately quantify the numbers that they're giving you. So most consumers end up completely confused about how potent their plant is.
Further, there are ranges. You'll have something that says, this cannabis plant may contain anywhere from 11 to 18%, or, 12 to 24. It's like, that's a big range. That's a big range.
It's too big a range. So from our knowledge in the pre-regulated industry, we know that the same phenotype of a plant given to the same grower who uses the same feeding and watering methods, it's going to be plus or minus 10% from its average THC content. So I was trying to figure out how they had a 50% variance in some of these regulated flowers. And then I got the answer from someone. Many of these large greenhouses under cultivation it could all be blue dream, but there could be 24 phenotypes in that, 100,000 square foot greenhouse. So you get a tremendous variance in the cannabinoid profile and the terpene profile. So it means that